Hey there, welcome to the Growth Whisperers, where everything that we talk about is building enduring great companies. I'm Brad Giles, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Kevin Lawrence. G'day, Kevin. How are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome, Brett. I'm really looking forward to the show today.
Awesome. I hope you've had a good week up there in Canada.
I got away into the interior. We have an Okanagan region where there's cities by the name of Kelowna and Osoyoos, and I was up in Kelowna last night. I'm in Osoyoos right now before I head back to Vancouver. And it's a beautiful spot in the summertime. Just love being up here. It's relaxing and good times with friends and getting out of the city. So yeah, it was really great.
Awesome. So what do we got on today? What are we talking about?
Well, today we're talking about one of my favorite numbers in business. And I know they say, and if you have kids or parents, you're not supposed to have a favorite. If you've got two dogs or two pets, you're not supposed to have a favorite. But this number called gross margin, and gross is almost a funny sounding word, like gross as in not pretty or ugly. It's a beautiful thing. I love gross margin, and in companies, finding ways for companies to make it stronger. Because from my perspective, it's really the number that tells you how good your value prop and your running of your business really is, how well you can buy, how efficiently you build or deliver, and then how well you sell and create value for your customers. It's like the ultimate measure, I think, of how smart you really are in business.
Awesome. My favorite number as well. And to be honest, if you're in business, it probably should be your favorite number, or maybe after cash or something like that, but one of the, let's say, top 3 favorite numbers. So maybe we should begin by just defining for the audience, what is gross margin, and maybe just so we're all on the same page, because gross profit for me is very different from gross margin.
So let me give you the technical description from mine. We can take yours, blend them together into one. Basically, let's just say we are a business that sells, I have a bottle of water bottles, right? And gross margin, if we sell a case of water for simple numbers, $5, and our cost is $2.50, that means we have a gross profit theoretically at that level of $2.50, which would translate into a 50% gross margin. Is the revenue that you get to keep after you pay for the expenses is 50% of the revenue. So gross profit is the actual dollars, the number of dollars, the $2.50, and the gross margin is the 50% in simple terms. Now, that would be the cost of the bottle and the water, and you might have shipping costs and all the other costs related to the sale of this particular bottle of water. Not just the physical, there will be other costs wrapped around it. But basically, that's how much you make on the things that you sell. And whether it's counted in dollars, called gross profit, or counted in percent, called gross margin. That's my version of it. I'd love to hear a different view if you have one there, Brad.
No, it's exactly the same. And what I would say is a lot of people get confused between gross profit and gross margin, and that express gross profit as a percentage, which it's not. It's a dollar. So or a currency. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. The murkiness can sometimes come when people begin to talk about labor, that I've observed. My definition is the same as yours. So labor is in the equation, or let's say direct labor. Okay, so employee labor, then that would all be below the gross profit or gross margin line. That would be all, we'd talk about that later on. So the labor to make the bottle of water, it wouldn't be counted. We talk about that later on.
It depends. And the answer is it depends on how people account for it, because people do account differently when it comes to, we'll call it the variable labor or the direct labor on it. Some have it in there and some don't.
And that's the thing. So I guess for today's exercise, we want to just keep it fairly simple, knowing that some people have some different kind of standards. But broadly, the best way to look at it is what is the cost of goods? The goods of, so if you're reselling, what is the cost of those goods? That's where cost of goods comes from.
And
so
if you take a service example, in a consulting model like we're a part of, if there's a project that's $100,000, and after you pay the people and the research expenses and the prep expenses and the administrative expenses, all of the costs to deliver that $100,000 project get deducted, and then you're left with your gross profit or gross margin. So everything around the service delivery. What you don't have in there is your overheads. Technically, in accounting terms, it's called your SG&A or your G&A or overhead. SG&A is sales, general, and administrative expenses. Fancy word for overheads. G&A is general and administrative expenses. When sales isn't counted as overhead, it's counted more up in gross profit. So anything that basically your basic rent, your accounting department, and all of these other departments would be general and administrative overhead. And those aren't in there because those are bills you're paying no matter what, whether you make one or don't make one.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got the base. We've defined what it's not. It is essentially what is the cost of goods as a proportion or a ratio to the total revenue. So it's the percentage. Yes. So why have we both said that this is the most important number? Like, what's your thought off the bat?
Because we're smart. No, because we've been in so many companies where you watch it erode, and in people's ambition to grow and their naivety because people tell them, oh, no, you need to give up your gross margin as you grow. That's someone who doesn't understand business. It can be a strategy. It can be a strategy to lower your margin and get more volume. Can be. But we both look at some of the best companies we work with who have healthy margins and keep them because, and we could talk about why, but the root of it is it has such a direct impact. And an extra dollar of gross margin or of gross profit is an extra dollar of profit. If I charge one more penny for this,
bottle of water,
one more penny, that penny goes to profit.
Yeah.
In almost every case. So it's so impactful, but what happens is it starts to fade. It's the way that you can evaluate new products or services or divisions. But if not attended to, and people get all excited about revenue, all revenue ain't created equal.
Yeah.
There's revenue that you can make a 45% gross margin, a 15% gross margin, and an 80% gross margin. And if you don't pay attention and you chase dollars or just revenue, by nature, if you're not calibrated around gross margin, you'll almost always dilute it because lower margin deals are often easier to get. It's, reducing your margin to get the business doesn't take a lot of brain power.
Yeah.
So it's very easy trap to fall into.
So one of the things that I've done and seen is salespeople who discount, right? And often that's because there's no disciplines around that. And it seems so intuitive that a salesperson with all of their bravado and confidence will go into a meeting and their job in their head, especially if they're not compensated around gross profit, if they're compensated around revenue, right? They will go into the meeting as if their job is to win the business, and then they will talk to the client. Now, obviously the client in their best interest is to get the best deal. So the output of that meeting might be that there's been a discount and they've said, look, we gave them a 10% discount, but the awesome news is we won the deal. But the cost of that is enormous. It's just
to the company, but not to a sales rep paid on revenue.
Absolutely. They don't care.
And that's why where there's variability in pricing, sales reps should almost always be paid on gross profit.
Yes.
Because now we're in it together. If they have zero control over pricing and cannot discount or cannot make a decision that will influence margin, you can pay them on revenue. There's no risk. Like go get all you want, because we know it's going to go between 27 and 29% margin, because that's our model. But when they have choices and negotiating power and all that stuff, yeah, we need to align their interests with the company. And if they can help the company to win more, then they win more. And I think the root of it, and this is where compensation is really, you gotta be very aware of it. And compensation is a whole other world. But the biggest thing I've seen, that's just because most people want to do the right thing for the company. The challenge is that there is no gross profit or margin awareness in the business. And this is what we see. And this is why it erodes. So for example, we have a business that used to run around 25% gross margin. 25 cents out of every dollar they would get to hold on to, and then pay their overheads and then have a profit. What we realized is they had a couple hundred salespeople, not quite, no, they had 100-ish salespeople and some service people, both of which had pricing decision authority, and they would just get the business. And we came up with a calculator, because that's a lot of salespeople aren't mathematicians. Some are, but many aren't. And so we came up with something called a green start calculator. Green meaning good, start meaning new piece of business, and calculator. So you would drop a couple numbers. You would drop a cost number in and a revenue number in, and it would tell you the gross margin percent, and it would be red, yellow, or green. Red means you got to fix something. You either got to buy a little bit cheaper or you got to charge a bit more. Yellow would mean close. Green would be, hey man, or hey lady, woman, you're in the money. So we trended up towards 28% very quickly. Remember, 3 extra percentage of gross margin means 3 extra percent of profit. It falls to the bottom line instantly.
Absolutely.
But because we had awareness. So in every deal they did, they had to use the calculator. And in every deal they did, if it was red, they couldn't put it through. Yellow, they were encouraged to, or their manager had to make a decision. But if it's green, go. And so teaching people about it and giving them awareness made a notable difference.
And that's a really important point, because the place where you lose gross margin is in the estimating department or the sales department, like depending on the structure of your business, assuming that there is variability. Because if you're a grocery store that doesn't do any discounting, it's just, that's the price, it's the RRP, the recommended retail price, you're not really you're gonna have other issues around purchasing, but it's the estimating. So a similar thing to what, quite funny that you said that, a similar thing that I've done is you start with a client and then you say, so what is your gross margin for last year? What is the, and they're going to say, okay, so it's 56% nominally. Let's pick a number out of the air. 56% was your gross margin. What I want to do is every quote that leaves the quoting department, I want to color it. And if it's 56% plus 5, taking 56 to 61%, it's a green file. If it's 5% below that, it's amber. Okay, so 56 to 51% would be amber. Anything below 51 would be red. Okay, and you need to get the director's signature on that to actually send that out.
Perfect.
Yeah, if it's, so you're doing the red, amber, green, super green across. What was the gross margin percentage for last year for the whole business? And it kind of, it's like the tide lifts all of the jobs a little bit, or at least the ones that aren't so good. And then again, what we're doing is for an amber, we're kind of justifying it, saying you've got to have justification and you've got to have sign off from your manager, but then you've got to have director approval for the red. And then it magnifies the impact on the business just by looking at it like that.
Well, of course, because you're slowing down the process or creating friction if there's going to be a discount, or if they're not pricing it right, like in a quote scenario. So people want to do the right thing, but you need a system to help them be reminded of the right thing. Now, and I'll tell you, Brad, like there's lots of examples where we have increased gross margin in many, many, many companies we work with. And yes, it would be easier to keep the margin lower, but we want to be great operators. You need great margins to fund other things. There's other things that we also look at too on the cost side, efficiencies and automation and managing the numbers. One of our clients has an amazing CFO that's I believe, Procter & Gamble or a Procter & Gamble-like packaged goods company. So I'm a gross margin freak. We have what you call a gross margin bridge. It shows a gross profit bridge, pardon me. It shows what the gross profit was supposed to be for the quarter. Say it was, simple numbers, $10 million. And then it shows every item that either went up and increased it or decreased it by line item of the income statement. So you can see the things, and in this company, there was a variable labor piece that was really driving it. It was a lot of overtime and inefficiencies in their facility. But so we have, on our quarterly reviews, we have gross margin bridges to show these specific items that were driving it. And getting into the detail, was it because of volume, more or less volume? Was it because of mix, the different products having different margins and how it affected it? Because that could be an underlying driver. Or was it because of price, rate, i.e., a cost factor or a revenue factor? So we slice and dice it from all of these different angles, and we find ways to make it better. And so the thing, like you said, Brett, I love it, is that often when I start with a business, and if there is an issue around gross margin, and by the way, I've seen some businesses with crazy gross margins, like you almost don't want to tell people. I've had a couple of businesses in industries that have low gross margins, and they found ways to get like 65% gross margins in hard goods, manufacturing type scenarios, because it's a very special niche with a big pain point. But going back to when it does erode, I get them to go back and do a historical 10-year comparison.
Yeah.
Let's look back 10 years and see how the gross margin did. Sometimes in that we'll do a unit view of, do number of units, obviously total revenue. But we'll look at gross margin and then sort of start to dissect it and see where we went wrong. I can go on about gross margin for hours, but we've worked on it and it's like, it's this like weird accounting number, but it's like, it's at the core of the business. So yeah, it's just awesome. So the root of it is
difference. I want to go back to the slicing and dicing. So I think that what you described there is what we'd call a waterfall graph. And that is understanding what are the
different than waterfall, Brad. Waterfall would show all the different products and their margins. It's in the direction of waterfall, but it's actually called a bridge. It's a different take on it.
Yes, I've seen the bridge. So a bridge graph and slicing and dicing it, because so many, and it kind of it's going to connect with what I'm going to speak about in a sec, which is about the strategy and the salespeople. But when you understand what are the areas that your business isn't contributing to gross margin, like which lines that you sell or products or services you sell, that's where you get the real insight that can make the biggest difference. There's a retailer that I work with. They're like a 50-year-old business. And I went in there and I said to them, look, if you're not making 10% profit, you are, you're not, your effort isn't worth it here. And they said, you're crazy. Like this business is 50 years old. We've never made, the best year we made like 4%. And I'm like, well, I don't want to say that you're wrong, but there's a good chance you could be. Like, it's actually possible. And so we had this kind of interesting, and I said, look, if you're doing less than 5%, you're growing broke. It's as simple as that. You're not keeping up with all of the cost increases. You've got to have 10% as a minimum goal. Like, that's the output of the leadership team effectively, is to produce a return for the shareholders and to grow the equity of the shareholders. So anyway, I come back. And we did this bridge, and we looked at the gross profit per line, and we looked at the strategy, and we focused on that. And now they are wedded to this 10% number like there is no tomorrow. And they said, look, until you actually challenged us on that, we never believed in our industry that it was possible to get there. And now we can see it as clear as day. And it's like, but that's because, that's because you didn't have a strategy, and you were selling things that you thought people wanted or needed at a price that you think that they had, which is fine. You've got to do the right thing by the customer, but unless you understand those numbers, you don't know what to do.
Brad, you are my brother from another mother. Like, I'm listening to you talk. I do the same thing all the time. I press people and saying, because I see businesses making 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35% profit in, could be profit, could be EBITDA, but massive profits in businesses you would never expect it because they know how to run the damn business. And that gross profit or gross margin number is one of them. So I'm with you. We start setting the bars. The number of business, I took a business that I worked with that was running 18%. They did the work. I set the challenge and the strategy to do it, where they were running at 18% gross margin in a business. Yeah. But we got them into the healthy 20s, 26, 28 in a business that normally runs in the low teens and at good volume. So we found over the years, I have done many, many things. The root of it is to make a decision and then start to really dig in and figure out why. And then how could we, go and get to 30% gross margin as an example, if you're running 22 and over a number of years. And I'll give you an example of something we did. I'll keep it generic because I don't want to give away the details, but I have a client, they were running lower 20s in the gross margin, but they were in the 20s. It was decent. We knew to really optimize the business, we needed to be around 30. That was my take on it with the way they ran, etc. First of all, we got comparables in their industry data, because there were some publicly traded competitors, industry data, and we saw that the best was actually running a 40% gross margin. Although they were a niche player, they were a massive niche player. So I was like, hey, boys and girls, it's available. It's possible. Let's go after this. So we started doing some strategy work on it and found a particular pain point that no one could seem to solve in the industry, and it's a service business, that if we solved that particular pain point, we could probably get 40, 45% gross margin. Yeah. And so we started doing it. The only problem is it worked so well, we got distracted by it a little bit and neglected the core business. Because there's these big fat margins driving massive profits, and it distracted a little bit. And again, it's straightened it out, everything else. But it was just about looking for those needs. I've got another company I work with. I don't work with myself, but indirectly I work with, and I actually invested in. So a friend of mine was buying this business, and I put some capital into it, and I don't even want to tell you the margins. I don't even want to tell you the profits, but it defies logic in business. Yeah. Most people think that you can only make 5 or 10% profit in a business, and that a 20% margin is really healthy, maybe depending on the industry. But I have seen things that would just blow your mind. But they're doing something different, that they're uniquely solving a customer need. It's not commodity stuff generally.
But that's a really important point, because all business models aren't created equal. No. Okay. And if you find yourself in a commodity business or a business with low margins, the job of the strategy work that we do, even if you don't work with an advisor or a coach, the job of the leadership team is to produce a higher return on effort for the assets and the people that are in the business.
Which is not always increasing the gross margin, to be fair. Sometimes it is running a commodity strategy and increasing volume and dropping your overheads, or better leveraging your overheads with much more sales velocity over the same overhead, or automating things. There can be, we just tend to work with higher, like a more value added focus companies that want to be, creating a premium experience, premium product, and have the margins to go with it. But you can run the commodity playbook at low margin, You just need to have a very different strategy.
But if you are running the commodity playbook, you've still got to watch gross margin really closely, because if
even more so because they're thinner.
Yeah.
They're thinner.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a good point, Brad. They are thinner. Can I offer one different strategy, even another layer on this, or do you have something else you want to share on gross margin?
No.
Okay. So even though I am obsessed with gross margin, all margin is not created equal. And I'll share an example. When I worked on the Scaling Up book project, and I interviewed 50 CEOs around the world for that were using Rockefeller Habits at the time, one of them told me about their business and an epiphany they had. They had their number 2 client by volume, right? And they were doing a lot of volume with this client, their second biggest client, that had an above average gross margin, right? Take their average margin. If you did a waterfall graph, they would have been above average.
Yeah.
When they did the full math and allocated the overhead costs appropriately, they were losing money on their number 2 client by volume, who had an above average gross margin. And here's why. And this is incredibly important, because if we're running at a 24 gross margin, there might be a customer or a scenario you could sell at 20 and make more profit.
Yeah.
Hear me out. Because this client was massive. I'm exaggerating, but they essentially consumed, if they were 10% of the organization's revenue, they consumed 50% of the executive time, leaders' time, and managers' time, because they were such a mess and complicated. They were a huge administrative burden to service them. So it would have only represented 10% of their revenue conceptually.
Yeah.
But soaked up 50% of the overhead of the business to service them. So when you take the cost of that overhead, you're losing money on the client. So you need to be aware, and we run models on this on clients to dial it in even further. I need to be aware of how much margin it takes, and I'll give you an example. So if we sell water bottles and we manufacture them in our facility, and then we ship them to a client, just for simple things, and we make a 50% gross margin. If we could import them by the container load, never touch them, and have them delivered to our customers, would it be smart to take a 15% gross margin potentially? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
When you can make 50% on this, why would you consider 15? Because this will soak up a lot of overhead. Of that 50%, I'm going to exaggerate, 20 or 30% of that 50 will go to overhead.
For those who aren't on video, don't stop. Kevin's holding up a water bottle and indicating the product.
Thank you, Brad. I forgot to think about that. So basically, you're just signing pieces of paper. It doesn't touch your building. Your humans don't touch it. You're making basically that 15% gross margin is actually 15% profit, because it's the only thing you might have is a touch on it for accounting. So pull 1% out. So it's 14% profit on 15% gross margin, because it doesn't consume overhead.
Yeah.
So this is the advanced level of slicing and dicing gross margin, is how much of the organization's energy or resources does it take. So that's a direct shipping from a vendor model, but even internally, there might be a customer who takes stuff by the truckload, but instead of the individual order. There might be a customer that only orders one product and orders massive amounts, versus another customer that has a lot of customization. There's one customer is fully integrated into your systems electronically. Another one uses papers and you have to manually do things, or they make mistakes all the time, or they require more compliance or paperwork, or they're in another country and you have to export. Like, there's all these other variables that that allocating the overheads appropriately to them can tell you a very different story.
Yeah, that's That's a really good insight. And so there are many complexities to it, but it still, I think, reinforces that this is the biggest lever. This is the biggest tool that we've
Yes.
got. And yeah, the one that we've got to pay so much attention to. So there's two questions that I want to cover off today as well. And number one is why, how does gross margin relate to strategy? And if you've got a good strategy, why should you see an improving gross margin? And the second question is about salespeople, right? So so that's
Let's
the
do the
first question.
strategy one first.
Just to clarify,
Yeah.
so the second question is, it's just about lazy salespeople, right? And we did touch on that before. I want to just dig a little bit deeper into that. Let's go back to strategy.
Yeah. Well, exactly, Brad. Because so this is when you're, for example, when you are looking at new products or services, one of the initial parts of the business case is what's the margin going to be? You know, I had a client that was creating all kinds of awesome, cool new products. Like they were awesome. Well, their margin generally runs in the higher 20s. These exciting new products on paper in the planning stage were coming out at 20. I'm like, kill it. Go back and come up with a better idea. If on paper they're showing 20, reality kicks in, you lose a few points for sure. The new product should have been coming out at 40. Like, why do we want to invest and do R&D on something that out of the chute makes us less money? And there was no strategy that it would grow and make more money in the future. So on strategy, and that's why I think gross margin is an indication of your strategy, how good it is. You're looking for those things that will meet needs where you can do something special, and either they'll pay premium, or you've got a costing angle that allows you to have really low cost or cost advantage.
So you're presented. Sorry, go on, finish.
No, for sure. So whether it's a new product strategy, new market strategy, I'm going to go into a new market. Great. What do the margins look like? Let's find out. Let's do a test. Because if you're not conscious of it, all these nice ideas, if they make less money than what you're doing now, something's not right. Or or it's not worth it. There's other factors in that market that make it less attractive.
So you're presented with a set of numbers, 12 preceding quarters, the last 3 years of quarterly results, and you only get the gross margin percentage, the gross margin. Like, what is that? And that's eroded about 1% to 2% per year. If you're presented with those numbers, what's the first thing that tells you? What's the if you see those?
Brad, with me, I'll have another 10 questions because it tells me to pay attention.
Absolutely.
And it tells me to investigate. But because there's so many other levers under the surface there, I'm curious about the volume. I'm curious about when we break down the cost side. I'd want to look at every line item of cost to understand, which lever is creeping, right? And is it a sales price? So I'd be looking at average price per unit, backing out inflation. Has the average price per unit changed, or has the cost per unit? So just it's slice and dice time, boys and girls. Dig in to see what's going on.
Why has it happened?
That's failure. It's failure. And unless, you might justify it if their volumes went up 10x, but I'd want to know that. And then I'd also want to look at it corresponding with the bottom line, because if they were getting better leverage on their overheads, i.e. SG&A was running at a lower percentage or overhead at a lower percentage, like I got to look at the whole picture. But I'm going to be really curious and concerned for sure. And as an example, I read an article about Intel, the chip manufacturer, right?
Yeah.
They've been around forever. You could say computer chips are almost commodity-like.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of what Intel's gross margin is on their chips?
What is it?
Now, verify this for yourself. And I did research. It was a credible source about 2-3 years ago. 80%.
Wow.
80% on a manufactured item that could be considered. Now Intel has a beautiful strategy of how they do it. Their strategy, and that's a whole, their strategy is brilliant. You know, Jim Collins talks about their strategy when he shares his flywheel. It is outstanding. And they've dropped other product lines along the way to invest here because they saw the opportunity. But they've been around for a long time. They do a lot of volume, and they've held at 80%.
They've got to spend a lot of money below the line to maintain
huge
market share on R&D. And the other thing, in terms of sales tactics, the beautiful thing that they did is they paid for their customers' advertising if it said Intel inside. I don't know if it was 100%, but I know they paid a huge amount of their...
They definitely help out or co-op it, yeah.
Yeah, and that was a really effective blocking strategy for their competitors as well.
There's a whole case study that we could do. So if we get back to your question, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, Brad. What would you do if you're presented a set of numbers and the trend over a period of time, it kept dropping 1 or 2 points? You know, what would you be thinking and or doing?
Look, I'm going to go to the two things. What is your strategy? But really, I'm going to want to, I guess, as a part of that question, I'm going to want to know how do you sell, and is discounting a part of what you sell? Because if you've got a sales team who want to hit their numbers and they've got the ability to discount, or if you've got an estimating or pricing team, if there's any price fluctuation, I'm going to look really closely at that and try to understand what are they doing, and is that the root cause of this gross margin erosion? Because it's enormous. Like, if you're having 1 to 2% per year, the impact on net profit is just phenomenal.
Right. If it's $100 million business, 2 points of gross margin, assuming nothing changed around your overheads, that's $1 to $2 million of additional profit and cash,
which is unbelievable. Like, and people just, many business owners, they just don't understand. I think they understand, but they just don't respect it enough, or they don't investigate enough. So first of all, I'm trying to put a fence around that. And if that's it, that could be the first answer. But then here's an interesting thought, which is the second thing I'm thinking about. It's around strategy. So, you know, the question is your strategy growing revenue and gross margin? Because if it's only growing revenue, then okay, it's not a strong enough strategy if you can't even maintain it, let's say. Once to grow a business, you go from 0 to $1 million, $1 million to $5 million, $5 million to $10 million, $10 million to 20. I reckon when you get to about $10 million, that's when the competitors look across to you and you're on their radar, and they begin to say, well, we'd like a piece of that pie. And the competitive pressures within the market can erode margins. But plus, you've got an established leadership team by $10 million, most likely on the average case. And the competitive pressures to grow, if it's not focused on gross margins, can erode that as well. So there's a couple of things when you get to that kind of point that can have an impact. Because if you've got a $1 million business and your competitor's got a $10 million business, it's very easy to fight on price alone and to go to the market for that $1 million competitor and try to steal business, because you could double your business by winning $1 million worth of work. So I'm looking at, number one, what's the pricing, and is the pricing eroding, causing that erosion? Number two, for salespeople, number two, is it market forces? Is the strategy simply not strong enough? That's the two kind of things that come to my mind.
Or has the product line faded and no longer relevant? Right? Like maybe the product line has lost its pizzazz, or it needs a refresh and a repackage, or like there's so many things. Yeah. But looking at the pricing, and are we losing? Are we not getting the right pricing? Or are our costs going up? Like it's kind of fun actually digging in and figure it out. So let's talk about the salesperson part of it, Brad.
Yeah. So I owned an IT business, and I had a general manager there who will remain unnamed. And I I remember saying that we were selling products, we were selling servers and things like that, and they had a recommended retail price. And we had very good relationships with customers, and our offering was really strong. Like we were just a small bit player in this business. And I said to him, when someone comes in and buys a computer, why are we discounting? Why do we automatically give them, I don't know, $600 off a $2,000 computer when there's a recommended retail price? And to the best of my knowledge, most of our competitors are selling at the recommended price. It doesn't really, like, we're just giving money away.
So what did he say? What did he say?
You don't understand, Brad. And that's always an interesting start to a conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, then, can you help me to understand? So that if I step into a side note of a side note, that's the killer question for a leader, right? That is the killer question. So Kevin, can you help me to understand why you didn't come to work yesterday? Can you help me to understand why our gross margins were whenever you want to be respectful and polite and just cut through every single thing, can you help me to understand is the
exactly
killer question?
It's coming from curiosity. It actually can be very disarming, and it is the right place to come from versus accusatory or whatever else you want to do.
But it still directly addresses the issue. Anyway, so coming back, you don't understand. And I said, look, we've got to, I think that what we need to do is we need to say, unless there's a reason that can be justified, and I don't believe that loss leaders are actually a reason. I think it's loss leaders are evidence of a weak strategy. All right.
Yes, and by the way, on loss leaders, and so what we've done in other companies, starting off by discounting a price is usually not a good strategy unless you've proven an ability to convert to higher pricing or something else. Some businesses do, like in the tech world and that, but like in the software, software as a service and stuff. But
yeah, I get it. It's a complex thing. Yeah,
it is, but generally it's a cop out. It's strategic. It's strategic. We're investing in this relation. So, we do in companies now that want to do it. Awesome. We're giving up 10 grand for this strategic piece. Well, let's allocate it. We'll take it out of the marketing budget because if it's strategic, it's actually marketing. Now the marketers are going to freak out and say, no way. But if it's truly strategic, let's account for it properly because marketing is where the strategic stuff would go. So anyway, go back. Sure, continue on there, Brad.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Because when you're discounting, you are taking money out of somewhere because there's a lifetime value to that customer, and it could be $1 million or whatever it is. You're just taking money out for no reason. And it's because either they're lazy or they're bad salespeople, or in other words, they can't.
Maybe they're making a good decision. They could be making a good decision, but that's really got to get run through the process and really dig in with their manager to understand. It shouldn't happen easily. But sometimes there could be a reason.
No. I can't wear that. A good salesperson can sell ice to Eskimos. A good salesperson can sell at a higher gross margin. I know what you're saying.
Yes, and if you're doing a bid, if you're bidding on a project and you're gonna, build a big building for someone, and you go in and you bid $22 million, and somebody else goes in there and bids 21, and the guy says, look, if you guys come in at 21 and a half, you can have it. You got to say is, for that 500 grand, which is about 5%, maybe something like that. No, but yeah, maybe 5-ish. Is it worth it? Like there are scenarios where we'll sit in meetings and decide, we got to give up a little something, but we can get the business, or long-term contracts. We're going to get a 5-year contract.
I understand exactly what you're saying. A good
Brad, hear me clear. I hate discounting. I hate discounting.
I hate it.
Discounting. And I think it's the key is it somebody taking the easy way out, or is there a legitimate reason and you need to be in that to get the business? Now, if depending on if you're discounting all the time, then you got other systematic problems. I agree. But I've just seen there are times when it's like you can justify it or rationalize it, or it might be a good decision. Said differently, there's different margins for different customers in different reasons.
I'm going to go back to your building example. I'm going to just cornerstone it by saying you're right, and sometimes it can be substantiated, but it's just that we give salespeople. I'm so tough on it because we give salespeople a license to be lazy, and I just don't like doing that at all. If we go back to your building example, if that was, what if the salesperson had built a relationship with that person for the last 2 years? Because it's a $21 million building, right? This is not a transaction necessarily. And they'd built that and they'd demonstrated value. They'd understood all of the decision makers. They'd understood the decision-making criteria. They'd demonstrated why they're different than the competition. Then
for sure, but that's why they are given the heads up. Drop your price by $500,000 and you can have it. That's why they got the heads up.
And that's why I'm saying you're right. Like it's not possible in every situation, but geez, there's got to be a high bar to discounting. For sure.
And Brad, I'm with you 100%.
Yeah.
Discounting should not be easy. And it's like, we should be trying 3 or 4 other things before we discount.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly, to hold our price and hold the integrity of our pricing. For example, in the real estate development world, if the market softens a little bit, they generally don't discount, but they'll add on a few extras and everything else.
Totally.
Provide the integrity for the price. So it is important, but the key thing with salespeople is that if they are given the power to move on pricing, then there needs to be controls in place, which smart organizations have, but they should also be paid based on that. And I've seen organizations that your percentage of commission varies dramatically depending on the gross margin you sell at. And if you sell it at 40, you're going to get your full 10 points. If you sell at 35, you get, 5 points. If you sell at 30, you get 1 point. I'm exaggerating, but that's the concept is that you notably feel an impact. And if you do a deal at 29, that would be a higher margin business. Like you don't get paid, but we're thankful you get your base salary, because that doesn't really add the right value to the business. And it is, I want to be careful that we're being respectful of salespeople, and it's sales manager's job to manage this process, right?
Sure,
it's sales manager's job to do the training, to be the backstop and the approval, to get involved on the tricky deals, because sometimes people don't think they're going to get the business. Some buyers are really smart, hey? Like some buyers know how to work a salesperson and get them thinking that they can't get it. And like a funny line, a guy I went to college with, his name, I don't want to say his name. His name was Severio. He was a fun guy and Italian guy, a character like you wouldn't believe. And he used to sell used cars as the way he paid through school. And when he was negotiating in the car business, when you buy the trade, you price the trade. That's where it's very important to price. And he'd walk around the car and oh geez, look at that, there's a door ding there and scratch. What happened? Geez, that's a good dent you got there. And then he'd say, what do you want for the car? And Brad would say, I want 10 grand. It was probably worth 10 grand. What? Is there a gold brick in the trunk? Like what's, he would have this reaction, put the customer, and he was a bit of a slippery guy. But the point of it is he was already setting up the negotiations so that you were probably going to get 7 grand for your car, and kind of putting on your back foot, because that was part of their margin strategy, is to buy trades at a price where they can easily make money on them, which is, there's all kinds of tactics, but a very, very good salesperson throwing the customer off their game. And there's other examples where the customer or the buyer, can be really smart about this. And we're not trying to say to do, slippery used car sales tactics. It's just, it was always entertaining and he made me laugh.
Yeah.
But the idea of it is to really know where you make your money and keep an eye on it and be willing to walk. And there's a whole other thing around negotiation. Most people are amateurs. Like negotiating with most people is like taking candy from a baby. Like they don't understand the psychological principles, both with customers. I've seen executives negotiate with a CEO, and I'll pull the CEO aside and said, "You just got worked." Like they put you in a psychological box before they did it, and then they did it. You didn't even know what was going on, but like you were getting pickpocketed in the middle of the conversation.
Yep.
Because of this, the way they said, there's a whole other conversation we can have around negotiating. So we pull it back to really the principles here, Brad, that we're talking about. And I just, we're both we're so similar. Although different perspectives, but I'm so passionate about gross margin because as we both are, it makes a real difference. And the number one thing is pay attention to it, know it, and understand the levers of what's going on. And then when you're looking at new opportunities, whether it's customers, products, or whatever, you should always be searching for higher margins or kind of, the top of the margins that people are able to achieve in a similar business. Yeah. And if you don't see how you could do it, learn from them. It's
so the right number, and we're moving to close, but in the right number creates the right question. Okay. So by understanding the purpose of the reason that we get numbers is so that it gets us to ask the right questions, and gross margin produces the biggest questions with the biggest impact.
So one last story I have to share. Yes. And this is on the estimating or pricing piece. So I have a client that, did a lot of volume in the manufacturing space they were in. They manufacture, they sold directly, and then they sold through retailers like Amazon and the like. And they had a product that they would do, it was a few million units a year of. And somebody on the pricing department screwed up the estimating side. They were losing $17 a unit.
Wow.
And they didn't know. So $17 of negative gross profit per unit, and doing a few million units a year.
That's not a very long-term strategy.
No. Thankfully, they made so much money on their other stuff. They were okay. But when they started to see why they were losing profit, they dug in. Yeah. And so again, this is why the stuff needs to be double checked. Gross margin overall, by customer, by product line, slicing and dicing it lots of ways, the best way you can. Rough numbers is okay, but there's a lot to it because it's basically the money making engine of the business, and it's worthy understanding. And if you want, the key is someone to produce the analysis and financials that comes from a packaged goods company like a Procter & Gamble type business where they live and die by this stuff. So someone who has a sophisticated reporting background. We've got one consultant that we use that helps us with that for some of our clients. But it's really, you got to have the numbers to know. And for almost everyone on your team, when you have the numbers and you set a target and you get their brains there, they can make it better. But without, like we both, Brad, you in the red, yellow, green on the quotes, my other client on the red, yellow, green on each of the projects. Yeah. It's like, it helps the good people to make the right decisions, and you as a leader to make your business sustainably more profitable and stronger too.
Yeah. Awesome. What a good chat. Look, we are both pretty passionate about it because we just see the returns that it creates. Good day today. So thank you very much for your time today, everyone. We are the Growth Whisperers, Kevin Lawrence and Brad Giles, here talking about how to build an enduring, great business. If you'd like to learn more about myself, you can go to evolutionpartners.com.au, and for Kevin, it's lawrenceandco.com. Thanks very much for your time. Have a great week.
Have a great week. Grow that gross margin.